Hello, today I'll be talking about 10 great rock/metal albums from the year 1989. Now, there are of course many albums I could choose from, but I decided to just narrow it down to 10. So, of course, that'll mean that there will be albums that I will miss. But these are 10 albums that I randomly selected that I feel are great from the year 1989. So, this is not a top 10, and these albums are in no particular order. So, let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to go ahead and start off with an album from one of my personal favorite bands, Aerosmith, with their album Pump. This was one of the first few Aerosmith albums that I heard, and there are still many songs from the album that I still enjoy, like Young Lust, Fine, Love in an Elevator, Voodoo Medicine Man, Janie's Got a Gun. Many great tracks on this album. So, of course, with their last album, Permanent Vacation, the band really had pretty strong success with that album, and this album continued their success commercially, and you had hits on here like Love in an Elevator, What It Takes, and The Other Side, and of course some others. But yeah, really good album from Aerosmith. But next we move to Alice in Hell by Annihilator. Often considered their best or one of their best. For me, I'd say it's easily their best. Now, some people point to their second album as their best. I've seen it before, their album Never Neverland, but that album's probably my second favorite. This one has to be my favorite because, I mean, you really can't go wrong with most of the songs on here. I mean, some of my favorites: Alice in Hell, Welcome to Your Death, Wicked Mystic, Burns Like a Buzzsaw Blade. Human Incesticide is another pretty solid track on here, but yeah, really good album from Annihilator and easily one of their best. The next one, we're going to go ahead and move on to Sonic Temple by the Colt. And this album and Love kind of fight for being my favorite album from the Colt, but yeah, definitely one of their strongest albums. And some of my favorites: Sun King, Firewoman, Edie, Automatic Blues, which I think is maybe one of their most underrated songs. Definitely a fun rocker of a song. New York City is another song that I really enjoy off the album. But yeah, really good album from the Colt and definitely one of their best. Then you move on to an album from a band that I feel is pretty underrated, and that is Fate's Warning with their album Perfect Symmetry. Now, if I remember correctly, this band is a part of the big three of progressive metal, along with Dream Theater and Queensryche. And now I have heard some comparisons between this band and Queensryche, and I can see it sometimes. But with this album, I think this album was the band's peak. Some of my favorites: Part of the Machine. I do dig the ballad Through Different Eyes. Static Acts is a song that's grown to be one of my personal favorites on here. At Fate's Hands, Nothing Left to Say. It was just definitely one of their best album closers by far. And yeah, really strong album from Fate's Warning and has to be my favorite. But now we're going to go ahead and move on to another band that I feel is really underrated. Easily one of the most underrated bands of all time, to be honest. I mean, been really enjoying their music a lot lately, and it is King's X with their album Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. Often considered their best or one of their best, and I'm gonna have to agree, it is one of their best. It's easily in the top three. I mean, this album, the self-titled, and Dogman are the top three for me personally, but this album is just great. Some of my favorites: Out of the Silent Planet, one of my favorite King's X songs. Over My Head, Summerland. Over My Head being the big song on the album. I really like Mission. That's a song that's growing to be one of my favorites on the album. Pleiades, if I pronounced that correctly, that's another favorite of mine on here. Fall on Me. I mean, really solid album from King's X, and if you haven't heard this album, definitely check it out. And King's X is a band that is kind of difficult to describe. I mean, I've heard some people say prog metal or prog rock. But I'd say they're more than that. I mean, you can kind of hear some alternative rock or alternative metal in there, and sometimes they have some funky rhythms in their sound also. Again, kind of a band that's kind of hard to describe, but if you haven't heard of King's X, definitely check out that album, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. Next, we're going to go ahead and move on to Living Color with Vivid. Now, with this band, of course, when people think of this band, they think of the song Cult of Personality, which is easily their biggest track. But yeah, it's the first song on the album, but there are other great songs on here, like Open Letter to a Landlord, which is a contender for being maybe my favorite song from the band. I really like that song a lot. Desperate People, another favorite of mine on here. Glamour Boys, Funny Vibe. Really good album from Living Color, and probably my favorite album by them. Either this album or their third album, Stain, which, I mean, Stain, maybe their heaviest album, but also their darkest too. But I think their album Stain is one of their most underrated albums, or maybe one of the most underrated rock or metal albums of the 90s. If you haven't heard Stain by Living Color, definitely check out that album. But this album, which is probably their most commercially successful album, definitely one of their best, really good album. But next, we're going to go ahead and move on to some industrial metal with Ministry. The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. And yeah, easily one of their best. Some of my favorites on here: Thieves, Burning Inside, Never Believe, Test. I mean, kind of like with any album you listen to, there are some songs in here that are better than others, and where the replay value is stronger than some others. But yeah, really good album from Ministry, and I'd say an essential if you're going to look into industrial metal. Definitely one of the most important albums in industrial metal, along with some of their other albums like Land of Rape and Honey and the album after this one, Psalm 69. But yeah, really good album from Ministry. But next, we're going to go ahead and move on to Red Hot Chili Peppers, Mother's Milk. Now, this is probably my third favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers album. My second favorite probably being Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and then I have Californication easily at the top, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. But this album, definitely great. Some of my favorites on here: Good Time Boys. I do enjoy their cover of Higher Ground. You have some also pretty underrated songs on here, like Taste the Pain and Subway to Venus. Nobody Weird Like Me. But you also have Knock Me Down, which is one of the more well-known songs on here. I really like that song also. But yeah, definitely one of my favorites from Red Hot Chili Peppers. But next, we're going to go ahead and move on to something a bit heavier with Beneath the Remains by Sepultura. And yeah, really strong album from Sepultura. Also has some of their best songs. I mean, especially those first four songs are just, in my opinion, excellent. Mass Hypnosis, maybe being a contender for maybe being my favorite song on here. I really like that song a lot. Probably one of my favorite Sepultura songs. Kind of underrated. Slaves of Pain is another really good track on here also. But Inner Self, maybe being the biggest song on here. That's definitely one of the highlights on the album. But yeah, really good album from Sepultura. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to the final album for this video. And it is Nothing Face by Voivod. So the best way to describe Voivod, at least in my opinion, is pretty much a mix between progressive metal and thrash metal, or technical thrash, however you want to put it. Because yeah, overall a pretty unique band, also kind of weird at times, but overall probably my favorite Voivod album. I mean, some of my favorites on here: The Unknown Knows, which is probably one of my favorite Voivod songs. I do like their Pink Floyd cover on here, Astronomy Domain. I do enjoy the title track. X-Ray, Mirror, Into My Hypercube is a song that's going to be one of my favorites on the album. Overall, a really strong album from Voivod, and if you're into thrash or prog metal, definitely give this album a listen if you've never heard it. Really good album. But yeah, those are 10 great albums from the year 1989 when it comes to rock slash metal. But anyways, let me know some other albums that you think are great from the year 1989. Let me know your thoughts on these albums I talked about here in this video. Let me know some of your favorite or least favorite songs or albums and all that good stuff from 1989. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.